Wonderful. Welcome, welcome. We have two poll questions that if you don't mind, you can answer now while you're waiting. Thank you. How much do you know about facility or contact tracing? Number one. Number two, are you or your organization concerned about your employees contracting COVID-19 from surfaces? As for how much do you know about facility or contact tracing? It looks like 57% of our audience says a little bit, and 43% feel they know a good amount. So in both cases, there's some high familiarity with contact tracing and facility tracing. And then for number two, this is around the concern about contracting COVID-19 from surfaces. And there's a tremendous concern around that amongst our listeners and viewers today. And that's at 71%, and 29% say they're somewhat concerned. So that's good. We have an informed audience here. And so I think that will really help us in our conversation today. So I want to welcome everyone and thank you for taking your time this morning to talk a little bit about boosting profitability, how facility tracing impacts productivity. This will be all about myth busting, getting your general awareness up, and about self-empowerment on this topic that's so near and dear to our hearts, given the situation at hand across the globe. I am Robin Dillard, and I'm the Business Equality Advocate. I'm also the CEO of the Business Equality Network and founder and publisher of BEQ Pride magazine, which is the reason why I'm involved in this conversation today. I came across and met up with Loudhailer and their founders. And today, in a few minutes, we'll get to meet the founder. But before we go there, I'd like to introduce you all to the topic of productivity and profitability, and most importantly, like it's stated in our title, time management and productivity are basically considered soft skills. But there's nothing soft about losing money, something like $10,000 worth of productivity per employee per year when management is when time is poorly managed. So today we have the time management fixer, Helene Segura. She's got a framework for decreasing interruptions and distractions and loss of time so the companies can spend more time generating profit. Helene Segura works with companies to maximize profits by decreasing inefficiency. She has been the featured organizational expert in more than 200 media interviews and is author of 4 books, 2 of which are Amazon bestsellers. She coaches hundreds of clients to productivity success and deliver keynotes and seminars to thousands of professionals on the go. Teach them how to regain control of their hectic work schedules and to curb a very expensive problem, the loss of time. She's born and raised and hails from Los Angeles, California. She's a former soccer player for Texas A&M and an avid world traveler, pre-COVID anyway. For nearly 2 decades as the owner of Living Order SA, Helene has combined her wide variety of life and work experiences with her study of instructional design and behavior management to root out and plug her clients' time leaks. Her 3rd book in particular, came to my attention and excited me because it starts off as the title is The Inefficiency Assassin. And when I get emails from Helene, that's what I see, the Inefficiency Assassin. And I love that. I love that title, Helene. I want to bring to your attention today, hot off the presses, the International Facility Management Association's leading publication, FMJ Magazine, has an article out right now by Jack Chen, our thought leader here on this topic of boosting productivity and profitability in the age of COVID. He is the CEO and founder of Loudhailer, a mobile-centric mass communication solution specializing in proximity capabilities such as contact and facility tracing. Loudhailer has pioneered a solution that ties together the requirement for contact and facility tracing into a single mobile application. He's also co-author of 2 patents with more pending. So welcome.
So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. We're here to talk about how businesses and facilities can reopen and stay open responsibly during these challenging times. Now, this initiative requires a multi-pronged approach, I think some of which are probably better known than others. So obviously there's the PPEs, masks, and sanitizers. There's social distancing, which is well known with the 6 feet. Testing, of course, a crucial part of this. Health surveys, as some venues are now requiring you to, and especially schools, are requiring you to answer questions about whether or not you have symptoms before you can enter the premises, as well as, of course, information and resources being available to staff and your customers or students, depending on your organization. But two of the areas where there's not as much awareness that we found in terms of what a business or what a facility can do is our contact and facility tracing. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So contact tracing, very high level, it's about identifying people who may have come into contact with an infected person. And so that those people can then in turn be notified that they can take action, whether it's to self-quarantine or get tested, but that they can then in turn notify their contacts as well. Facility tracing is about identifying where people have been on site in your premises and for how long, so that you can then determine whether or not any additional cleaning or procedures need to be taken. An interesting question that we get from a lot of the businesses and organizations that we speak with is, does contact tracing work? Like, should they even do this? Does it, how do they know? And, contact tracing is actually a public health tool that has been around to fight pandemics for several decades. The idea is about trying to put out these small fires before they get out of control. And for something as contagious as COVID-19, excuse me, contact tracing is an important tool in fighting the pandemic. And I thought just to give a, really kind of simple example to show how contact tracing works is to look at 3 jurisdictions, Taiwan, Australia, and the UK. The Taiwanese population, very similar in size to Australia, but the Taiwanese have very powerful pandemic fighting tools and a very robust contact tracing program. And you can look at the number of confirmed cases as of September 2nd. This is taken from Johns Hopkins. And you look at Australia, very similar size in population, and the cases are, much larger number of cases and deaths. In fact, I think that the disparity has only gotten worse since the last time I looked at this. The UK, 3 times the population size of Taiwan, number of confirmed cases and deaths exponentially greater than those in Taiwan. And the challenges and the system problems that the UK and Australia have experienced with respect to contact tracing, it's very well documented. And, this is, it's not to say that, obviously there are other issues that could be involved, but this is just a very quick way to say, does contact tracing work? Yes, you could dig in a little bit more. And of course, we would work with you to understand how best that it can be applied for your organization as well. Another common question or frustration that customers voice to us is that, they can't boil the ocean, right? You're just a company in the US and there's all this stuff going on in the world outside you, so what can you do? But in fact, we think that there is a lot that you can do, right? You can't boil the ocean, but you can boil your own pot. You do have control over your own facilities and what's done there. And that's what you need to focus on, right? You can't change the world, but at least focus on your own area, your own facility, your own site. Now, this does require a multidisciplinary approach. So HR needs to be involved. Legal, because as you can imagine, there are already a number of wrongful death suits being filed across the country where one of the allegations is that the deceased was not notified by their employer that they were exposed to COVID, and that would essentially be saying that they didn't have a contact tracing program. Facilities, security, IT, compliance, because for example, OSHA has a number of record keeping and notification requirements that you need to do. It could seem overwhelming, but we've thought a lot about these issues, and we'd be happy to work with you and all of your different teams to help you figure out what's right. Another question I often get is about the Google-Apple collaboration. When they decided to collaborate on a contact tracing protocol between the two tech giants, there was a lot of press and a lot of buzz. But what a lot of employers didn't understand is that that tool is for public health authorities. It's not designed for employers or private sector. In fact, employers could not get that information. And I think it's also just as importantly, it does not support facility tracing. Now, I think the final point, which seems very obvious, but is easy to forget, is that policy should drive the technology solution, not the other way around. And oftentimes talking to customers, they may ask us, well, how do you guys do it? And we say, well, what does your policy require? What should you guys, how do you guys want to handle notifications? How do you want to handle this? And we're very happy to engage in that conversation, but I think it's just a good point to be aware. Don't pick a tech solution and try to fit your policy around that. It should really be the other way around. So hand it over to Helene, our inefficiency assassin, to talk a little bit more about how facility tracing can boost profitability.
Great, thank you very much, Jack, and welcome everybody. When people hear the term productivity or time management, they often think of more tactical topics like dealing with email overload, managing document storage, or improving those unproductive meetings. But the bigger picture of productivity is, how do you operate as efficiently, effectively, and financially prudently as possible? That was the case pre-COVID, and it remains the case now, but with an added twist. And that twist is the COVID response for each company. All companies, agencies, and organizations who have or will have employees on site, in order to address COVID-19 according to federal, state, and local mandates, and federal, state, and local compliance orders, and legal liability prevention, and insurance requirements, there are 4 overall responses that need to be addressed. And each of these components affects productivity at a company level, a management level, as well as an individual employee level. So I'll quickly go through what these 4 components are and then dive into each one and talk about how it is related to productivity. So the first prong of the COVID response is a notice of policies and procedures. And that, it's pretty self-explanatory, giving notice to not just your on-site staff, but any contractors and customers who will be coming on site. And you're doing this via multiple streams of communication. A second prong of the COVID response is prevention. Preventing the virus from even entering your facility, not just because you care about the health and well-being of your people, which of course is primary, but also because it's become a costly liability issue. The third prong is the actual response. So first, notifying required authorities if you find out that somebody who's been on site has tested positive, and then following your local municipalities' protocols accordingly. And then the fourth step is the actual mitigation once there has been an occurrence on site. And that means sanitizing any location the COVID positive individual has been in your facility. Now, as managers and leaders, your job responsibilities involve developing, implementing, and evaluating each one of these 4 components. And of course, this is in addition to all of the regular workload that you have. What you're doing is based on mandates, research, analysis, and finances. And you'll be able to evaluate the success of your implementation by collecting data. On the other hand, from an employee perspective, they won't be evaluating your plan using the same criteria. In fact, they're not going to be evaluating. They are going to be forming an opinion about your response. And if their judgment is negative, it will affect your bottom line. Because when we react to a situation emotionally in a negative way, it exponentially lowers productivity. Because time management is all about mind management. It's our brains that decide how we use every single minute of every single day. So if our brains are bogged down with questions, doubts about our own health and safety going to work, confusion about policies, or worrying about what could happen to our families if we get sick, all of that takes your employees' concentration away from their actual work. It lowers their productive output, which affects your profit. So let's quickly now jump through and take a look at how productivity is affected by each of these 4 components. And as I go through these, one of 2 things will happen for you. Either 1, you'll realize that, hey, you've already addressed each one of these contingencies in your COVID procedure. So you'll receive affirmation that you've done everything right, and you can give yourself a pat on the back because you're pretty much good to go. Or 2, you'll take notes on what you might have left out, or perhaps you haven't even started developing yet for your policies and procedures in having your employees and others on site. So here we go, connecting the productivity to these different responses. The first response I'll look at is prevention. And yes, I know it was listed second on the list. Even though it's second chronologically, it's actually the most critical component to your messaging plan. This becomes your why. If your employees don't receive messaging that you are there to support them and to do everything possible to protect them and their families, if they instead perceive your plan as a procedural rollout, that will definitely deflate their sense of group belonging or cohesion, which is going to lower their productivity. And then related to notices of policies and procedures, going back to that first component on the list, once you've crafted this, the next most important step is rolling this out in a manner similar to a new employee orientation or onboarding to explain your why and their why, the employee's why. They'll be worried about things like how well your plan will protect them and their families, because safety is one of our basic human needs. What extra work your plan creates for them because management said so, and what inconvenience the plan would cause for them. Your initial rollout should prevent those kinds of questions from even being formulated, and then you can explain the procedures. If the language and messaging are unclear or somehow missed, this can lead to misinformation, disinformation, or a lack of cooperation. For leaders, this affects your productivity because instead of using your time somewhere else, your time would have to be spent on re-dissemination or re-education or damage control. From an individual employee perspective, if the language and messaging are unclear or somehow missed, this can lead to those productivity killing questions and negative emotions. And then we have the actual response. Once you're notified about a positive case from a management perspective, the response can take an inordinate amount of time in order to handle the facility and the contact tracing that would need to be done. The county health agencies that have been responsible for contact tracing so far, when they have to do this for the general public, they have found that they only have about a 10 to 20% actual communication rate with people who may have been exposed to the virus. So time-wise, you or someone you delegate to would have to figure out who might have been exposed, and then following confidentiality guidelines, inform each one of your employees manually who have possibly been exposed, and you have to do this as rapidly as possible in order to lower your liability. And if you can't reach those employees, you need to spend time finding them. And if you can't figure out who might have been exposed, then that could mean the entire staff might have to self-quarantine. And then the fourth prong of the COVID response is the actual mitigation. And if you don't know where a positive tested person has been, you'll need to shut down the entire office and pay for sanitizing services for the entire building. And this is costly, especially if you end up with multiple cases. Time-wise, you'd have to instantly shift your entire staff to virtual. And even if they've worked virtually before, this still costs time because of the changes and notifications they need to make as they scramble to make those last-minute arrangements because their workday has totally been turned on its head. If there were meetings or appointments scheduled for on-site people who are not internal, you'll have to notify them, spend time on that, and making arrangements to transition them to virtual or to completely reschedule. In the end, all of this boils down to how can you save time and money, which will maintain or improve your profitability, and how can you effectively protect your people and facilities? That's a lot to have handed to you all at one time, and it might sound overwhelming, but when you realize that there's a resource that could take away a large chunk of the time and resources you'd need to spend on this COVID response, you realize, okay, this is doable without working around the clock. And that resource I'm referring to is automating facility and contact tracing. You won't have to spend time on tracking people down or guessing who they might have been around. You won't have to shut down the office and pay to sanitize the entire building. You won't have to send all of your employees home because you're guessing. Your employees won't have to make a last-minute shift to suddenly go back to working at home, which would cause all of that previously mentioned chaos. Stressful chaos can be prevented. And time can be saved, and the bottom line can be better protected by utilizing a tool like facility and contact tracing. When I've listened to the news, I've heard conflicting reports about tracing, which makes it pretty confusing. And those reports raise questions for me because I am very serious about privacy protection. You know, what is this tracing business, and how does that technology work? And is Big Brother watching me? Now, there is technology that has been developed that respects employee confidentiality and implements tracing through technology instead of human effort. And that's exactly what Jack Chen is going to dive back into right now. Jack.
Okay, well, thank you, Helene. And certainly in the Q&A, I hope that we'll have a chance to discuss a little bit further about some of the themes that you covered, especially the perception of safety, which isn't always the scientific version of safety. But I think first, just to get back a little bit about contact tracing, and we've been talking about contact tracing as if you know what it was, and so given some of the attendees less knowledge, if you will, just to provide everyone a bit of background, right? There are actually a number of different ways in which you can contact trace, and I've listed 4. You could probably say that there's more than that, but these are kind of the general ways. The first, which is the most common method, from what we've observed, is the manual process. And what that means is, if someone is tested positive, a tracer will contact that person, ask them for their information, ask them about where they've been for the previous 15 days and who they've been near. Then in turn, they will then track down those people to notify that they have been exposed. So as you can imagine, this relies on people's memory, which may not be that great. And also is, we're talking about for 15 days, which is a long period of time. The second method is camera surveillance. Now, you could have a version which is you're using cameras to observe whether or not people are observing social distancing, right? That's not what we're talking about. Camera surveillance for the purpose of contact tracing is where you are capturing people's biometrics. It's essentially doing facial recognition and following them throughout their entire facility. Now, a lot of folks may not know this, but there's actually a number of parking garage operators across the country that have implemented this. And I think, this approach raises a number of very interesting issues because, how well are, how do people give their consent? Just by simply by parking, what if they miss the sign? Moreover, biometric data, especially facial recognition, is very valuable data for hackers, right? It's not, your face can't just open your phone. It could actually potentially help you access your bank account at the ATM for some of the banks. So it's very valuable data that you're collecting, which means that you just need to take extra efforts to protect it. Moreover, there's also, as Helene referenced, consumer privacy laws. You need to think about how you comply with the Consumer Protection Acts. In California, in Utah, if you have EU nationals on your facility, you need to comply with the GDPR, and you may be required to delete that, the protected people's biometric data. So, so lots to think about there. The third method is location tracking. Now, you could be tracking people outdoors, so using GPS or geofencing. Or you could be tracking them indoors through sensors, such as ID tags that they have to swipe. This method is not so much about tracking people's interaction with each other. Instead, you're looking at their location data and to look at any kind of overlap. And then if there is overlap, that's when you're deciding that, oh, okay, they were exposed. Now, the fourth method, which is our approach, is you're actually measuring proximity using people's smartphones, so that it's not just if you were in the same city block, but you may have been in different floors of a high rise, but rather we're looking at did your two phones connect to each other because you were close enough to make that connection. Now, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that manual tracing is the most common method. And so, well, guess what? Manual tracing is facing a lot of challenges right now. This is a National Geographic article from a couple of weeks ago. So what are these challenges? Well, it's shortage of people, it's shortage of funding, there are delays, case surges. But I think the most troubling challenge is distrust. And by that is there's actually two prongs to this. First is, not surprisingly, scammers, identity thieves, are pretending to be contact tracers. So they'll either call people who are COVID positive, pretending to be tracers, or they'll just contact people randomly, pretending to be tracers and saying that they've been exposed to someone. And they're trying to get personal information from them. Now, we've also heard from a couple of schools that when word got out that there was an outbreak at their school, reporters were calling parents and teachers, parents and students, pretending to be tracers, trying to get information for their news articles. And I think for any organization, you need to think about if there is a COVID outbreak at your firm, at your facility, there is potential risk that your staff and employees may be exposed to, or your customers, but also potential reputational risk or even corporate espionage. And what we found is that a couple of schools that have previously selected to use manual tracing have now decided that they need a technology solution to it because one, the people in their community will know that a contact tracer won't be contacting them. In fact, it'll be handled through technology, through an app. But also, just helps reduce, it helps increase that level of trust, but also is much more scalable, as opposed to contact tracers being overwhelmed and then there being a backlog to this. We have another poll question.
In what ways can people be exposed to the COVID-19 virus? Mark all that you think apply. So multiple choice. Wow. So all of the above is basically with 100% everyone's agreed on this. In what ways can people be exposed to the COVID-19 virus? Person-to-person contact, 100%. Contact with the contaminated surface, 100%. And airborne particles or aerosols, 100%.
Right. I think there's so much information coming out about this pandemic every day, and I think we're all learning every day as well. But aerosols is kind of like the latest, the latest thing to worry about. I think if you're thinking about not person to person, but rather either surfaces or aerosols, we're really talking about facility tracing. So in the previous slide, I had talked about contact tracing, which is about, people to people exposure, but now we're thinking about people at facility, whether because of surface or the air environment, or something related to the place. There aren't a lot of documented cases about this, but they are starting to grow. And here are a couple of the headlines, right? I mean, I think the most kind of eye-catching one is a case in China where an asymptomatic carrier, she rode an elevator alone, and then 70 people in her building got COVID. And that was documented and traced, and there was a report published in one of the medical reviews that's undergoing peer review right now. And which is just to say, there's so much focus on the 6 feet, which is important, but we need to think about the facility as well. And surprisingly, most of the customers that we speak to are ignorant of even about thinking about this kind of risk. And we spoke with one company that they told us interviewed, a few dozen different vendors, and we were the only one that offered facility tracing. And which is why, we thought that helping to host this webinar was a good idea to just help educate the public on these topics. And in Robin's intro, she mentioned that, I just authored an article talking about the responsibilities of facilities managers. And in the article, which I go into a little bit more detail, in New York State, and this could be possibly other jurisdictions as well, a facility may be required to apply special cleaning procedures to any areas where someone tested positive has spent time on the site. And of course, according to OSHA, COVID-19 can survive on the surface for up to 72 hours. And so when we run our facility tracing analyses, we'll be using the 72-hour time frame as the scope of the analysis. What are our advantages to compare to what's out there? So first, we take a BYOD, or bring your own device approach, which means that anyone who is entering the premises, all they need to do is download the app. And that also reduces the need for the facilities manager to keep track of sensors that are being assigned to visitors. What's also really interesting about our solution is this dashboard. There's a screenshot of it to the left of the slide. There's a lot of information here. So, if you want to dig into it more, please contact us with the information later on this page. But the dashboard is, as far as we know, we're the only solution provider who has this. It gives users the ability to see if they've been near other folks. It's a way to manage their proximity to other people. Now, this is not contact tracing, right? So first of all the information is anonymous, so you can't see who you've been near. It's just that you're near people. And also this information is more inclusive because it's looking at who you've been near, not saying that you were 10 feet or 6 feet or 3 feet from someone. But at least it's giving the end user the ability to say, okay, hey, does this thing work? Oh, it gives a sense of control back. And you can also look at your number of proximities over the course of, say, 1, 7, or 14 days. Now, another advantage that we have is we try to offer as many COVID-focused solutions within one suite as we can. So within our mobile app, we can support contact tracing, facility tracing, notifications, so that if an organization wants to have the have the technology be the one to send out notifications and reduce the the potential risk of scammers, that we can handle that notification within our solution. We can even send out health surveys. We could help you track how many people clicked on the survey, how many people looked at it, didn't. And most importantly, because we do live in a very litigious world, digital record retention. So we automatically keep this information for you should you need it later on, whether for OSHA reporting or litigation purposes or whatever else. Another interesting aspect of one of our advantages is that our platform can be used both during and after COVID. About a month ago, we started getting people asking us, okay, well, what can we use with the Lobular solution after COVID? And to me, that's a good thing, right? Because people are thinking about life past this, the current really challenged situation. But because of our patented two-way Bluetooth technology, we can help our customers offer contactless and proximity services to their end customers. And whether it's payments, order ahead, curbside, the indoor, underground, 3D, GPS kind of capabilities, automatic check-in. These are all kinds of very, can be very interesting revenue generators for convention centers, stadiums, arenas, airports, areas where the bring your own device is a good approach. You're dealing with large numbers of people, but that you can offer them a sense of security, that you're trying to operate your facilities in a responsible way, but be able to also improve their experience when they're on site as well. So here are a couple of links now. We are in the process of rolling out the new version of the app, which has the Discover dashboard that I just showed you earlier. That should be available this afternoon. We're just in the process of rolling it out through the different app stores. But here are the download links. If you download it now, it won't have the dashboard, but this afternoon it'll ask you to update the app. So for the App Store on the top, Google Play on the bottom, the QR download links on the right. On the left, if you want to check out the new article, just came out yesterday, there's the QR code there that you can link to as well. So, and if you want to learn more, visit the resources or email us. We'd love to hear from you.
Let's see what we have. Okay, well, our first question is, what should a business ask a vendor when they're picking a contact tracing solution?
Yeah, great question. So I think that so here are a few suggested questions, and obviously also depend on what kind of business they're in. But one is to think about facility tracing, right? Especially if you have large numbers of people coming through your facility. If you're picking a vendor who does contact tracing, you should ask them about whether they provide facility tracing. Talking about the compliance and digital records retention, that's an important question. What we found is that some of the vendors out there will only keep data for 7 or 30 days, and that if you want them to keep the data for longer than that, then there's additional hidden fees. So that's something to think about, especially if if the business or the employer is concerned about litigation risk. Other things to think about is whether the contact tracing service is whether they can support notifications and surveys. What we found is some of the folks out there, they only do one thing. So they only do surveys, or they only do notification, or they only do contact tracing. There's already a lot going on. So if, to the extent that you can have a vendor support more of those features within one solution, it's just going to make your life easier. Not just, from a daily operational perspective, but also from a compliance perspective as well. And then finally, I think two other things to think about are, is there any kind of physical location verification? In other words, if somebody's answering a survey, did they actually go on site, or was this somebody answering a survey but not really there? And then how are the data delivered, right? So if you're handling survey data that might contain HIPAA information, you can't just email it in an unencrypted format. You just, those are just some of the things to work out and think about.
Well, that's great. I think you're going back to our original conversation at the top of the hour where you spoke about policy driving the solution as opposed to technology. And a lot of what you're talking about is, I think, and in this question embedded is that we really need to understand what's the policy, what is it you're trying to answer, what comes first. And I think that's the most the wonderful thing about the Loudhailer solution here is that it's simple and it's elegant, but it addresses a lot of these issues right out of the box in one solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've thought a lot about these kinds of issues so that you don't have to, and we're happy to, help your team, help anyone work through thinking about a lot of these questions. And I think you also, sometimes guidance are changing, right? Guidances are changing in this pandemic. What happens if, I think it's interesting, like some vendors say, oh, we can measure down to the centimeter or down to the, down to the inch that you're 3 feet, 6 feet, whatever else. And my thought is, well, what happens if the guidance comes out and says it should be 10 feet?
And it has.
Especially if you're worried about aerosols, right? So does that mean that you need to buy a new system, or can the system be tinkered with? And so you want to, have as close to a one-stop shop as possible. May not be everything, but you want to, fewer vendors you have to deal with, the better. But also one that is flexible, so that when the guidance changes or the needs change, because we're learning more about this pandemic every day, that you have a solution that can scale and be modified and tailored as you need it to be.
So in the case of contact and facility tracing, we still need an agile solution that's responsive and adaptable as things change in this fluid situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it looks like we have another question that I don't think you've actually answered yet. So this one basically says that the GPS contact tracing can drain your battery. Does your system have this problem too?
Yeah, so no, we in the iOS version, so what we're focused on is tracing inside the facility, right? So if you're inside a warehouse or an airport, a convention center, GPS doesn't work very well, but it's also not very effective, right? Because you have all these different rooms and conference room and different floors. So GPS doesn't work well in that context. And especially when you're in that kind of environment, your GPS app will drain even more. So we use, our primary method is to use Bluetooth, and that's how we're conducting the tracing. So it doesn't have that battery drain problem. There is a footnote to that, a caveat, which is that under the Android system, the way they've set it up is that even if you're doing tracing through Bluetooth, you need to enable location services. But in our tests, there's been no meaningful impact on the battery issue. And on the iOS, if you turn off the location services, as long as you have proximity services turned on and Bluetooth turned on, it'll be just fine. You won't notice any impact on your battery usage at all.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Jack, do you think a national regional contact tracing solution will work, or do they need to consider this kind of solution for their office specifically? And you sort of addressed this, but how do you reconcile stuff that's out there that's for national, regional solutions versus what is really required inside a particular office?
right? So the new versions of iOS and Android actually have the contact tracing capability built in. The challenge is not many people are using it. And whether it's because of they don't know about it or they actively don't want to do it or whatever else, who knows. And if you had a very robust national, so if you look at Taiwan, right? So Taiwan, incredible contact tracing program. When they learned about what was happening in Wuhan, they immediately were able to track down the people in Taiwan who had visited Wuhan recently. And they were even able to get to the taxi drivers who took the people from the airport back to their homes. Like that's that's the level of contact tracing that they were able to do. In the US, we're never going to get to that level. And so a national tracing program isn't going to hit the kind of level of participations that it needs in order for the program to be effective. I think if your venue, facility, or business has a lot of visitors from across the country, you're most likely going to have to look at implementing a solution yourself, because the public health solution is either going to have inadequate adoption or no adoption at all. And I think most importantly, even if there was public adoption sufficiently, it still doesn't give you facility tracing, right? So you would still, all you would know is that, oh, this person was on your premises. And then, you have to decide whether you're gonna shut down the whole place to clean it because you don't know where that person has been. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we do. Here's one. Lots of good stuff out here. This one is simply about visitors to your site. Could you go over that again? What happens for people that you don't normally come into your site or aren't always there? What's the difference in how this solution would handle that versus others?
Right. Okay. So now we're getting into policy, right? Talking to a customer, we need to decide with them what is their policy with respect to visitors. So we were recently talking to a school. They were thinking about having students wear sensors as a way to trace them. But then what do you do about contractors who are coming on site to fix something or install something? Like, how do you do it there? So with our solution, the students can have the app downloaded to their phone. But then if you have contractors come on, all they need to do is download the app from the App Store, log in, register, and then they're automatically part of the system for tracing. We would have to work out with the school how they want to handle notifications, to the people, and how the visitors that can report. So we don't. Our current customers are looking at only supporting this for their own employees, and so any kind of COVID positive event, we would rely on the employer to tell us. So we're not letting users self-report because there's potential for data quality and verification and all that. So one of the things we would have to work out with the customer is how do they want to allow for visitors to self-report. So it's doable, but again, it's just one less sensor that you have to manage and assign to contractors and visitors, for example.
So we have a related question, Jack. This one says, the company I work with only allows limited personnel to have cell phones in the construction workplace. Is there an alternative device that can be used?
Yeah, so we are actually looking at supporting two things. So one is a key fob. Now, so you can do a key fob solution for tracing people, and that would reduce, whether for safety reasons or productivity reasons that you don't want them to have, their phones, so they can carry a key fob. Now that, and you could do that with our Bluetooth tracing solution. So, we're actively working on supporting that right now. Another an alternative that we're also working on is a wearable. So like a watch that tracks your temperature and your heart rate, that you can be monitored that way. So let's say that if you're playing sports, as opposed to working in construction, that you prefer a watch as well. So we are working on both of those solutions. And then we would just work with you on whether, how you want to handle notifications. So in other words, you just want us to do the tracking and then you handle notification outside, or do you want it to be a combination of the app as well as the sensor, the key fob?
Jack, the question has come up. So how effective would this solution be if the employee doesn't grant you permission, doesn't allow it?
Yeah, and so actually, Helene, I think you and I have talked a little bit about this in terms of recruitment, yes, and user engagement. So if you could, if you have any thoughts to share on this question.
Sure. The key is going to revert back to messaging. So this means even before the rollout, understanding the personalities and the primary concerns of all of your employees. So that way each one of those is addressed ahead of time. And that removes the questioning from their minds, because it's that questioning that one person might have that can lead to other questioning that other employees might have. So the key is absolutely in that rollout and basically troubleshooting and asking yourself, what are all the possible questions that the employees could possibly have, all of their concerns, all of their worries, and those are all addressed upfront by the management team in multiple streams of communication. And that will greatly reduce the number of people who would not want to participate, because this is for their own health and for their family's health as well.
Yeah, and there's also, again, policy, right? So you have some of the employers out there who will essentially mandate it and won't give employees a choice. But, I think that having the employees understand why this is to their benefit, and we can also tailor the technology to suit any of those concerns. And believe it or not, the number one concern we hear from employees is, I don't want my boss to know how much time I've spent in the bathroom. Right? That's universally like the biggest thing that people worry about. And so what we can do in that instance, for example, is we don't, this is not meant to be a surveillance system so that your boss can just type in a person's name and see where they are, or look at, who's in the bathroom right now. That's not what the solution is about, right? Instead, it's only if there's been a positive event. And for that matter, if you use the bathroom where someone who turns out to have been, been infected had used it as well, wouldn't you want to be notified, right? So there are steps that we can take, and we could, serve as a little bit of a barrier in those instances where the employer wants to do so, so that the employee can feel a little bit more secure about participating in the program.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up, and let's reiterate that since this is about profitability and productivity, especially in the workplace, the employee's confidence and level of confidence that they can have trust and understand the overall goal here is to keep us open and healthy and safe. I think because absolutely, if people don't have confidence, no solution's going to work. So I think this is, a wonderful, wonderful conversation to have. We have another question here, maybe two more, but this one in particular. For the folks that it seems to be that there are folks on the call who are not the decision maker at their place of work. Who in their offices should they contact? Who in their space do you think they need to talk to about this very important issue?
I think it depends on the organization's structure, but I'd say probably HR is the best place to start, right? Because what is a company's greatest asset? It's people. Who's in charge of the people? It's HR, right? And this is about protecting the people. And so HR should very much have a place at the table, if not be at the lead of that process. And HR touches everything, right? It touches facilities, it touches IT, it touches security. And so I would say HR is the best place to go. And if nothing else, just start a dialogue, with your HR department and just ask them about what they're doing and how are they thinking about these issues, and that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, most organizations have at least published some level of communication about reopening and reentry plans, and that's another place to look, as well as with the chief health officer. Probably would be a good answer, and that would help them to get a feel for what's in place. I think right now, many organizations have decided to open in the new sometime in January or so on a more formal basis, and maybe even after that. So there's still time for people to have a healthy conversation and dialogue about what the plan is. And just like you mentioned earlier, this is a fluid situation here. It's changing as we talk. And here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's getting colder. So that introduces a whole nother level of complexity that this particular solution suits, and will allow them to do a more comprehensive tracing of both the facilities and the people.
And what we found is that, offices, so like in Manhattan, less than 10% have reopened. Okay. Then JP Morgan, right, just a couple of days ago, made a big announcement. They were going to bring all their trading people back. And then yesterday, they just started sending people home because there was a COVID outbreak. Now, I don't know how much work JP Morgan has done, but I'm sure they're trying to do contact and facility tracing right now, unless they decide to clean the entire building. And I wouldn't be surprised if JP Morgan employees are getting calls from scammers pretending to be, contact tracers. I mean, it just every business it needs to have a plan, or at least be thinking about these issues and understand that it's a work in progress, just because we're learning from this as we go.
Oh, we have another question. Okay, some construction sites are not cell phone friendly due to mechanical and structural interference. Would your system work in such an environment?
Yes, because we use Bluetooth. And that's, so we've actually, long story, which we can get into if the attendee wants to learn more. But our whole journey with Loudhailer got started because we were thinking about connectivity challenges, which is why we opted for Bluetooth. And Bluetooth is, you don't need a carrier to have it work. It's device to device, and it even works in hospitals where cell phones aren't very good. So yeah. We can handle a lot of environments. Yeah, I think the only thing we can't do is underwater.
Yeah, for those late to the game, Loudhailer has, and this is in my opinion and probably the opinion of many others, a very simple yet elegant and robust solution in telecommunications that solves a lot of problems. This particular call and conversation is around contact and facility tracing using that particular use case and the solutions they came up with there. So this is actually right on time in terms of applying genius, in my opinion, to a practical problem that's facing the world.
And our system is designed to be modular as well, so that as a construction site, the building is getting erected, you can add components to it, kind of like a Lego bricks idea. So that you can grow the tracing program as your site is growing, and then when the building is done, you can just take it all away. It really is designed to be very easy to use, very mobile, and easy to add or subtract.
We've already gone over, and just to be respectful of the time for all of our wonderful guests for today, we are going to end.
Thank you all very much. Feel free to reach out to us if you want to learn more or about the dashboard. And again, the app, should be ready this afternoon. But if you want to just download it now, you'll be prompted to update the app later today. So
yes, so that's sales@loud-hailer.com.
All right. Thank you, everybody.